I'm an artist, I'm a writer, and I'm a poet. I'm a history buff, and I have a passion for Africa and for seeing Africa and getting to know Africa, getting to understand Africa. Again,
Sure.
I'm an artist, writer, and poet. My first love, my first passion is art. I've been doing art all of my life. The genre that I focus on mostly is metal work. I make jewelry. I do metal smithing, casting, anything to do with metals I can do it, but I make jewelry primarily. I also am a writer. I've been writing for a number of years. I have a lot of publications, academic. I've written a couple poetry books, but this is my first endeavor in writing something along the lines of Discovering Kano. You know, initially I went to Africa the first time several years ago. I was importing jewelry from a woman who was a Maasai in Kenya. And so I traveled to Mombasa, Kenya, because I had been importing a lot of work. I wanted to actually meet her. I wanted to meet the Maasai tribes people and to purchase directly from them. And so that was an adventure in and of itself. So I went to Kenya and Tanzania. And it just really sparked my interest in knowing more about the motherland and knowing more about the people and cultures of Africa. I think so often in the United States and in Black America, we have a very singular view of Africa that's really not accurate. And so when I went there on that first trip, I discovered there was a distinct difference between the people in Kenya and the people in Tanzania, which are very close to each other. I mean, they share a border. And so from that point on, I decided that I was going to endeavor to go to Africa more regularly. So after that, I started preparing to make another trip, but unfortunately, COVID got in the way. After COVID, I went to Morocco and learned a whole nother aspect of Africa because of Morocco being North Africa. A year ago, I went to Ghana, went to Accra and Kumasi, and again, learned the difference in peoples and cultures, and I was fascinated by that. So as I was endeavoring to get ready to think about where was I going to go next, I stumbled upon looking at Nigeria. And some people would say, well, like if you go to Lagos, Nigeria, Lagos is very similar to like New York. Well, I was like, well, I don't need to travel across the ocean to go to another New York. So I started researching further, and I stumbled upon Kano, Nigeria, actually looking through some brochures and some pictures, and I came upon the Hausa tribes in Kano. And I saw these brochures, and there were these pictures of the Kano Durbar Festival, and I was fascinated. I was immediately hooked. There were these black men in these robes and turbans and just phenomenal imagery and something I'd never seen before with reference to Africa. And so I started to research that further. Well, it was interesting to note when I was a child, as a budding young artist, I used to draw these black men in these robes and turbans. And my mother was like, where did you get this from? I couldn't answer. I had no idea. I was just compelled to draw these pictures. When I saw those pictures, it was reminiscent of these pictures I drew as a child. Excuse me. But also, I started doing research on my own lineage. And it turns out that on my mother's side, of the family, we are descendant of Fulani. Average person in America has seen that, and the average person in our communities in Black America is totally unaware. We don't know anything about this aspect of African culture. Not that it's hidden; it's just not talked about. I think with reference to the general view, and I'll speak for myself, and I'm fairly well read, and I've traveled some, but there's a singular view of Africa, in my humble opinion, more often than not, And it's a very, and when we talk about Africa, people oftentimes talk about tribal Africa. And tribes are a part of African culture, but we tend to lose sight of these are nations. These are not, it's not one group of people wearing one specific type of garb or attire. And I mean, let's be honest, I think in talking about Africa in America, one, there's a particular perspective of Africa as everyone is descendant of the North Atlantic slave trade and what that meant. And it's not true. That is not all of Africa. And so was important for me, and that's what I wanted to start finding out for myself, how broad, how large Africa is. I think the first thing people tend to not take sight of is how large the continent is. And I first kind of realized that when I was going, my first trip to Africa, when I was going to Kenya, and I flew out of Amsterdam, and as we were flying, crossing over into the continent, and on the plane, you can always flip over to the map and see where your plane is. And I realized at that point, we were just entering the airspace over the very tip of North Africa, and I had 10 hours to fly to get to Nairobi. It takes 5 hours at the longest going from New York to Los Angeles. That's about as far as you go in the United States. So it's 10 hours to Nairobi. Nairobi is not halfway down the continent. And when I got to Nairobi that time, then it was from Nairobi to Mombasa, another 3 hours. And then as I understand it, going from Mombasa to South Africa is another 8 or 9 hours. So it gives you some idea of how large the continent is. And the fact that you can drop like China and Russia and United States and some other places in Africa and still have room. It's huge, and it's disproportionate. The way it's shown on maps is incorrect. So Africa is huge. So if you take that into consideration, and then you think about where the people in Africa live, all of the different people all over Africa, to view them through one lens is naive and ignorant. To assume that they're all the same is naive and ignorant. They are not. Africans are extraordinarily diverse. And talking with the people in Kano about Kano and Nigeria itself, then the discussion comes up about the Hausa and the Fulani and the Yoruba and who's who and what's what. When I was in Kenya talking to people there, and someone asked me when I was there about another tribe in Kenya, I didn't know. I was only familiar with the Maasai. So I asked my host who was Maasai, and they said, oh, yes. They said, yeah, there's a ton of them here. And I said, well, how would you know them? He said, you wouldn't. And they said, well, why not? They said, because they wear Western attire, but we look the same. But the Maasai do not give up their tradition. So that's why you see Maasai, you always see them or you typically see them in their attire and the way they wear their jewelry. And I'm a big fan of his. I think he's a remarkable man. And he's a moderate Muslim, as I understand. And so there's some Muslims that didn't take to or didn't cotton to his moderate stance about being somewhat, some people might say, somewhat of a progressive. And so subsequently, there are some Muslims that do not appreciate that perspective because you're talking about changing tradition. He's more liberal about some things, and so some people don't like that. So there is another Emir currently in Kano. And so when I was flying in and talking to some people, they said there are 2 Emirs. I'm like, what are you talking about? So I didn't know anything about that. So when I got there, the day I arrived in Kano, Kano, as a brother likes to correct me that I know this from Africa, Kano, I discovered that day the Durbar was not going to happen. I planned for months for this and spent a lot of money to make the trip to see the Durbar festival because I wanted to see all the celebration and the horse parade and all of that. It didn't happen because of security concerns that day. There were concerns that there were going to be people that were going to disrupt the parade. So I didn't get to see that, but I adjusted my expectations. I'll talk about that in the book. the tradition, the culture, the culture itself. I mean, I think it's something to be witnessed. I've traveled, as I said, to other countries in Africa. There are some similarities when you go to markets and things, but the difference in the Kano market, when I've gone to markets elsewhere, they're usually people that gravitate toward you. They know you're a tourist, and whether you're black or not, they know you're a tourist. And they're trying to sell you stuff. The people in Kano kind of care less. Their markets are for, it appeared to me, for them, not highly touristy. So the things that you see in the markets are things that they purchase it's their culture. I was with my host, Ahmad, one night, and we were out and they asked me, "Oh, Mr. Virgil, would you like to sample some of our delicacies?" Okay. So we got to and it's in the book. There's a huge fire pit and these men roasting meat over the fire pit, and I was a little reluctant, but I tried it, and it was quite good. And then I had to take into consideration, because sometimes our own prejudices, our own stereotypes, it's like, what is that? Oh, these people are Muslim. They're not eating bush meat. They definitely are not eating swine. So it's either, probably lamb or goat or beef. Well, it turned out this was beef. I'm not a lamb fan, but so it's interesting to see the processes and the things that they do, and the events that I was able to participate in. So there's a lot of ceremony, a lot of tradition. One of the things, and I don't capture it in the book because I did not meet the princes. The Emir has 12 children, and so his sons are princes. His daughters are princesses, and so I did not get to meet them, but I got to meet some other people. His chief of staff, and he has a title I could not pronounce, but the palace guards and the courtiers and it's just fascinating. It's a fascinating culture, and the palace kind of belongs to the people, even though and it's hundreds of years old. So again, is the history, and there's some of that captured in there. I couldn't capture all of it. I wasn't there long enough. I mean, I could probably spend a year there just learning about the culture, but learning about what has taken place over the centuries there. But like I said, this dynasty goes back a couple hundred years, actually associated with another first king that goes back 1,000 years. So when you stop and think about it, given context, we only go back a couple hundred years, and you're not handed anything. If you're turbaned, or if you wear, and I started to learn, like, I can look at a turban and tell who somebody or what rank someone is in their community. But when certain people walk up, certain people will start bowing immediately. People start kneeling immediately, and there's a certain grace and elegance to all of that. Some of the other things that I was fascinated about, the traditions. When I went to the dye pits, which is different from the tanning pits, they do a blue dyeing in the dye pits that are renowned worldwide. And fascinatingly, and I captured in the book, tie-dyeing originated there. So the tie-dyeing that hippies started doing back in the 60s originated 500 years ago there. And they only used 3 components. There's a flour, ash, and potassium that they use. And they dye everything from a very pale blue to a blue-black in these dye pits. And so to capture that, but then the dye masters were explaining to me, they refused to use any modern chemicals. These dyeing methods go back centuries, and they refuse to consider that. So it's a lot of tradition, a lot of pride and a lot of tradition. And so the picture here on the cover, that's the palace. These are some of the celebrations here. So I wanted people to just get a familiarity and hopefully inspire people to learn more about this culture, but not just this culture, about African cultures, period, because they're so rich. And we tend to lose sight of it because of things, the way things have evolved in this country and the way history has been told, we don't know our history. And that's what I've been really wanting to learn is African history. It's not about me tripping. It's not about me wanting to prove anything to anybody or I get to go here and you don't. It's not about that. For me, it was about going and learning and understanding and just learning about who my people come from. And I think it's something that all people should be familiar with because the history, the traditions are just so phenomenal. So many things that have evolved over time. And then there's some cautionary tales. There's some lessons learned. One about people not banding together and sticking together and how other people can exploit that. And I think that's tremendously important. And I think we lose sight of that. And I think, unfortunately, like I said, I didn't see the Durbar Festival, but they made sure I bore witness to a tremendous amount of a phenomenal history, culture, tradition. So maybe one day I'll make it back to see the actual Durbar. I was a little disappointed because the imagery, and I've seen pictures and I've seen video of. I mean, if you can imagine, if it were 1,000 horses, but 5,000 horses and horsemen in this raiment and beautiful robes and turbans, and it goes from little kids up to adults, and then it's the Emir at the front, and then they have his artillerymen and the musicians and the drummers and all. Truly remarkable. I got to see some of that, not all of it, but I captured some of what I saw here in the book, and I talk a bit about it. Yeah, a lot of people ask me about how did I get the audience with the Emir. As I was researching where to go, and I discovered Kano, and so I started asking because I didn't know anybody there, and I would tell anybody, if you get ready to go to Africa, know somebody. You need to know somebody. You need something. I would not ever recommend. It's probably like coming to Detroit. You don't know nobody and can just stroll around 7 Mile. You might run into the wrong area, right? But so I'm not going to divulge all my contacts, of course, but I had people that knew people that ultimately I ended up writing a letter to the Emir. And so it took some time, and then I finally got a response from His Highness and invited me to come and explaining to me that there were going to be people there that were going to be responsible for me while I was there, ensuring that I saw certain things and participated in certain things. So the Emir is a very busy man. Well, while I was there, so that was how I ended up coming by the opportunity to engage him at all. I didn't know anything about an Emir, but that's how that came about. But when I got there, my hope was that I was going to get an audience with the Emir, but that's a king. There's no guarantees. And I know that he's a very busy man, and I know there are all these celebrations. And what I didn't know is that he is the person that is, first, he is the, in essence, imam of a very large Sunni Muslim population there. And his title is not imam, but he's the head of the very large Sunni Muslim, over 1 million people. And so he's revered in that regard as well. So I knew that there are all these things going on. So the chance exists I may not meet him. I hope to meet him. On the Saturday before I was leaving, I was out and about shopping, and we got a phone call and said the Emir would see me at 7 p.m. So I'm thinking, wow, that's kind of late. But his uncle, who was another royal, died while I was there. Well, in Islamic tradition, that there's a lot that goes to that. That also meant that the Emir had to receive a bunch of people that week because of paying their respects to the Emir, giving their condolences. So they said at 7 o'clock I was going to see the Emir. Well, I was having a fit. I'd had an outfit made, but it was too plain. I wanted something. And they were assuring me that what I had was cool, but I was like, nah, I want something more fly than that. So they said, okay. They kept indulging me because I was like a little kid on a lot of stuff. But so they finally sent me some pictures, and I got these pictures of these beautiful gowns, and I was like, that one right there. So they took me back to the hotel, and I was getting ready, and Muhammad, my driver, came and they had this gown he laid out, and you've seen it, it's phenomenal to me. And so they helped me get dressed and they take me to the palace. And this is when I learned that the palace, what I had seen was a chamber in the front of the palace. It's kind of public space. The palace is huge. I mean, huge, like downtown Detroit, huge. So we keep going through gates, and then we finally get to a back gate, and we go into a large chamber, and there's all these people there. There's probably 50, 75 people there. I'm like, he got to see all of them? So I'm starting to think that I'm probably not going to see him. You know, I'm still on a wing and a prayer. Well, someone comes out, this little guy comes out, and he starts bowing in front. How they adorn themselves. So that's true throughout a great portion of Africa. But is that any different than the United States? If you go to certain places, you go to Texas, you see cowboys. And they're proud of that tradition. Cowboys wear cowboy hats and cowboy boots, and they drive their trucks. So what's different between a Hausa man who wears turbans, and this is their attire, and it's practical for them. The attire that they wear, because of the intense heat, even though it appears to us, or it may appear to someone on the outside, well, why are they wearing that? It seems like it would be hot. Well, it's designed to keep them cool. I learned when I went to the Kermie market, you want something on your head, you need to be covered because the sun is intense. So to our thinking, you know, hot here, you know, t-shirts, shorts, you would bake your skin. So they wear things to cover and protect themselves. I'm assuming, and some of it is religious. I don't know all of those things, but I'm not Muslim. Tremendous respect for the Muslim tradition. And, you know, I adopted a lot of their culture while I was there. And I used some of their terminology out of respect. But it's also fascinating because, again, you're talking about cultures and languages and things that go back thousands of years. And then people want to make the assumptions as to how the people in northern Nigeria end up being Muslim or why they end up with certain traditions. And they assume that that is because they were attacked by people from Arabic countries. It's not true. Because of the trans-Saharan trade, everything came and went through that part of the country. And so subsequently you get people traveling and you get people learning about traditions. You have scholars and religious people that will come through, and so people adapt and start utilizing what works for them or you know, becomes predominant in the culture and the community. So, you know, the book is very personal to me. The culture was very important to me, learning about the culture. There's rivalries that go on to this day. There's a huge rivalry. I never saw the event I went there to see. I went to see the Durbar Festival, which is a celebration that comes at the end of Ramadan. It's right on the first day of Eid al-Fitr, and that pronunciation probably not great on that, but there are two Eid celebrations in the Islamic faith that happen, and one is right at the end of Ramadan, and the other one I believe is in June. But the Durbar Festival is in celebration of that. That first Eid festival or celebration is the breaking of the fast, and so Ramadan you fast every day, all day until sundown. They fast. And so this is the first day at the end of Ramadan. I know nothing or little about Ramadan. I was in Morocco for Ramadan as well. But the opportunity to witness these various celebrations and traditions was huge for me. And I wanted to share those things in the book. And so while I did not get to see the Durbar Festival because of some challenges that they have going on right now. The current Emir actually had been deposed several years ago. Needless to say, the Emir, who in essence was my host, I am before in Morocco. And in Morocco, when I went to the tanning pits, you walk into the building, they hand you a sprig of mint. You walk upstairs, and you realize when you get upstairs why you have this sprig of mint. You need to put it in front of your nose. But the tanning pits, it's a balcony way up, 3 stories up, and some distance away from the tanning pits. Tanning pits, in ancient traditions, when they use tanning pits, initially they use urine for tanning. They don't use urine anymore. But in those cultures, now I don't know about in Nigeria and Kano what they used, but in Morocco, for instance, they use pigeon poop. And they have people that they have cages, and they go out every morning and they collect the bottom trays of the cages as pigeon poop. Smells god awful with the whatever else they use, and I think these are natural ingredients that they use for tanning. And so you stand at a very far distance, and still the smell is atrocious. In Kano, as I'm walking through the Kermi market and I come around and we're going to the tanning pit, and I have a little Nigerian man kind of leading me. He's a little old man, but he's fast. And so I'm following him along, and I turn the corner, and lo and behold, the tanning pits are right there. I mean, there's no distance. They are right there. And I thought I was going to die. You can't describe the smell. I'm not sure what they use. I wasn't sticking around to ask. The tanning pits are used for tanning skins, typically cowhide, sheep skins, maybe reptile skins, but I think more often than not, it's usually leather goods that are hand tanned in tanning pits. I don't know who the people are to do that job, but yeah, the tanning pits are remarkable to see. Now, I was there doing Salah, so that's a holiday. So there weren't a lot of people there working that day, but there were a lot of animals. There were goats and stuff like that roaming around. So like I said, I don't know what products they use to tan, but it never smells good. And I'm sure in the United States, I'm sure there's some chemical that's used, but at least I think it is. You know, it's interesting. When I travel, I typically am on social media, and I share my pictures a lot. I have a bit of a following. So I share my pictures, and there's some people that seem to enjoy seeing my pictures. And some friends were saying, you really need to do a talk. You know, are you going to do this or are you going to do that? I had no intentions of doing any of that when I started out. I went for my own purposes to see this environment, to see these celebrations, these events, and all of that. And but the pictures and I had captured some video of some of the processions and things of that nature, the mini durbars. I had captured some of that. And so people were fascinated. So people were asking me to, you know, would I consider doing it? And I started off, first I said no. Then I said, well, why not? And so it's kind of taken on a life of its own. And it's been a labor of love. I've enjoyed doing it, and being able to, because I think what I share in Discovering Kano, I know I had never seen anything like that. And I don't think the me, and he says the Emir has given instruction I'm to be given a tour of the palace. Whoa, wow. I'm not expecting any kind of special treatment. So the palace guard comes, and then this other guy who's a kind of a courtier, and they take me on a tour through the palace. And I'm just mind blown as I'm learning the history of the palace and how the palace is designed. And I don't want to give away palace secrets, so I'm not going to tell a lot, but they're designed so you can't run through a palace. Like if you're going to charge a palace, if you get inside, you find yourself in an area because it's short hallways. Then they jumble on. I suspect they're boiling oil hit you at some point. But so they take me on a tour. I see the stables. I see all of this, and we go back. Well, when we go back, there's another new bunch of people, and I'm like, oh man, I'm not. But all of a sudden, they come and get me, and they take me down a hallway, and we walk in this big, beautiful room, and there's the Emir sitting in this big, opulent couch, and tells me, come on in. And he's very elegant, very gracious man. And he says, please, please sit. So I sit. So he starts apologizing to me. And truthfully, I'm saying, they got pictures of me shaking your hand. I'm straight. I can leave now and I'm good. You know, I got a chance. He says, but I wanted to take you and show you around the palace. Okay. So he says, please wait, go wait, and give me a little bit, and then we'll take a tour. So it wasn't long before they came and got me again, but it was interesting to note as I was walking through the palace, people were like making way and kind of bowing, and I was like, this is kind of cool. I could get used to this. But so we go back, and then when we go back again, he takes me on a tour of the palace, and personal tour, and I probably spent over an hour, maybe 2 hours. I was flabbergasted. It was one of the most remarkable experiences of my life. But I started to learn a lot. The Emir has 4 wives. Each wife has a palace on the grounds. And so we walked through, he showed me his gardens and his fountains, and then we went to one of his personal libraries. And he was telling me the history of his history, and he showed me where he was raised in the palace. And, you know, so it was just truly remarkable. Like I said, he was so gracious. I think that was the thing that caught me. I look at how our politicians behave, and I watched him because I was at events and I saw but he has a whole system of handlers, people that are around him. He can only be seen a certain way. If he gets ready to fix his clothes or something, these men come and they surround him. It's in the book. And they cover him, so you can't see him. Like, you can never see the Emir sneeze. He gets ready to sneeze, they put a fan up in front of him. So there's this tradition and how graciousness and how he's revered. And this is Africa, you know, and this is not what we get to see. And I'm sure this exists with other African nations, other African leaders, but they don't want to show us that. So I'm looking at our politicians behaving in the worst possible fashion, and then I'm meeting these people who they would denigrate, who certain people among our politicians would say, you know, call countries bad names and things, or, you know, negative connotations. And then I'm watching these people who have this legacy, and they're holding it down. And I think that's what's most important. They're holding it down, you know. And that's what I came away with. And so when people see me, like, you know, I wrestled even today with what should I wear for this interview. And I said, oh, I want to wear maybe, you know, because I don't want to be like I'm always in that attire. But I got, as you know, I got a bunch of it. And I wear it often because it's who we are. We you know, we like to go around talking about, you know, king, queen, all of that. It's deeper than that. It's deeper than that. All of us ain't royalty, but a lot of us are. I mean, and the people that are not necessarily royalty, they still hold it down. They have a certain dignity, you know. And so when I go into, well, as I understand it, chiefs would be, they run many different levels. When I was in Ghana, for instance, and you know, they're chiefs to villages or communities, and so a chief is maybe considered maybe like a mayor, but a chief may also be a governor. In essence, I mean, it can go on up the scale, and sometimes when you talk to them, a chief is kind of a king. They're rulers, to put it that way. And so in Kano, they have people, they call them title holders, but they're noblemen. So, and I don't think the term title holder in English translates to the same thing. They try to make me understand, but I think a title holder is a little more of it's more of a nobleman. And so they are authorities within communities. So it just depends on what community they come from. They may oversee a governing body. That's what it boils down to. It's really what it all boils down to. But an interesting thing, for instance, about an emir, even though this emir's grandfather was an emir, he was Selassie I. This is Mahamadu Selassie II. but it's not hereditary titles. So the emir is actually selected by a governor who's an elected official. And so there's a lot of complexity, and a lot of it goes back to when the British invaded Nigeria around 1900. And so there was a period of colonialism, and then Nigeria gained its independence, I believe it was in the 60s. So there's a lot of history to understand there. Now, the interesting point to me was that while I've been in countries where there's, not said, but there's a perceived little bit of resentment against the colonial period, I didn't get that in Nigeria. And there's some interesting points that I was just noticing. Some people seem to be held in some esteem. I've seen some reports, and I didn't talk to the emir about it, but that, for instance, Queen Elizabeth maybe had a place or a palace within the palace. So there was some relationship there. And how much that matters in the governing of the communities, I don't know yet. Those are things I'll probably be learning, or I hope to learn over time, inshallah. Yeah, for me, the book, thank you. For me, the book, like I said, is a labor of love, and I talk about some of the things here. The thing that I want people to understand, it's not a textbook. It's not a definitive overview of Kano. I didn't go there with that perspective. This is my journey. I wanted to share my experience and hopefully inspire some people to research and look for themselves. This gives you a broad perspective, one perspective, my perspective. But I think it was certainly, I've enjoyed learning about the community, the culture, the people. One of the things that I noted there is a tremendous amount of respect that they have for one another. I was given some deference because I'm an elder, and that's typical throughout Africa, and it's something we've lost in our communities, in my humble opinion. But fascinating to see the deference that people pay to the people of importance. Stores there's a certain dignity, a certain holder. Not everybody ain't like that, of course. You got some people, but that was the general sense. And so my thing with Discovering Kano is I hope people will buy it, of course. But and I know it has good pictures. I took them, and so, but I took them with a certain heart, a certain spirit, and a certain thing. I didn't just. I took over 500 pictures. They're certainly not all in that book, but I was fascinated, and so there's a lot to learn about Africa. There's a lot to share, and like I said, it's simply my perspective. I hope it inspire other people to learn more about Africa, particularly more about Kano in northern Nigeria. And I should point out, Kano is the largest emirate, I think, in northern Nigeria, but it's not the only one, and he's not the only emir. There are other emirs, and there's a council of emirs or something along that. I don't know much about that, but there are other emirates close by, even up there in that area. And Yoruba tribes. Well, Fulani and Yoruba the Fulani in particular are closely related to the Hausa tribe, which are these same people that do these festivals, and they come from northern Nigeria. So it all just kind of came full circle for me. So as I've been doing research and discovering and looking to learn more about Africa, to learn more about the various cultures and people and countries, then this just all came about. And I'm planning to continue my travels as much as I possibly can. As they say in Islam or in Arabic, inshallah. But I plan to go back. I don't know if I'll go back to Kano, or we will see, but I'm definitely going back to other countries. But it was just a different culture. So again, my interests lie in learning about my people, about where and what I'm descended from. And so I wanted to know just all of the various cultures throughout Africa. And like I said, the diversity of them has fascinated me. And so I'm keeping that up. Kano is a fascinating city. It's an ancient city, and they've not really, from what I saw, it was not really a tourist destination. They're not really structured that way. However, their Department of Arts and Culture, I believe it is, and I may not have that accurate, the title, but I think they're working towards some of those things. Had I not had a host and people to show me around, it's not a place you could fly into and jump in a cab and just go. It's not that type of a destination. And they come to the palace to receive the blessing of the Emir and to pledge allegiance to the emirate and to the Emir. And so to witness that, to see these men that come by the dozens. It was a several-hour event that I went to one time, and they just came, in groups of 20, 30, 40, 50, and they come and they bow before the Emir. And there's all the chanting that goes on. And so it's fascinating because they're all wearing these amazing robes. They call them Baba Riga, these beautiful robes and these beautiful turbans. And these are all black people. And to understand or to witness and understand royalty at that level, which I had never seen. I've been in the presence of royalty when I was in the military. I served in the President's Honor Guard. So I've been close, but never up close and never in person. And to see that, so I'm sitting behind princes, and across the room are noblemen, kingmakers, and people like that. And the esteem that they have for the Emir, who is a king, was something I had never witnessed and didn't really anticipate seeing. I didn't know I was going to be invited to see that. So that was very exciting and very intriguing and challenging. It was 105 degrees every day I was in Kano, and by being a Muslim country, they're very modest in how they dress. So you don't see shorts, you don't see short sleeve shirts. And I wanted to be respectful of the culture. So I wore tunics every day, I wore long pants every day. And so when I went to these events, in particular at the palace and in that receiving chamber, there's no air conditioning. But the palace is centuries old, and so you sit through these rituals, these people coming and bowing before the Emir, and so it was fascinating to see, for me to witness and to participate in. Actually, they made me go and bow before the Emir. I wasn't ready for that, and so it was comical to some degree. I don't know how comical it was to them, but I was like, I got a bad knee, a bad hip. I'm not accustomed to getting on my knees, so it was hard getting down there and getting up, but I managed. But I sat through the rituals, the receiving, until the Emir had seen the last person. He will sit there as long as they're coming. It numbered in the thousands of people that came to pay homage to him. I didn't enjoy the heat. One day when I went to the market, the Kermi market, the market, again, goes back centuries. I think it's 500 years old. They talk about it in terms of hectares, but I think hectares are similar to acres. But it's literally miles of shops. These shops have been there, so it's kind of hard to describe because it's just streets, but it's like a maze walking through there, and it's open air. But I'm not accustomed to this, and I didn't have a hat on. And the men in Kano, the people in Kano, are rarely bareheaded. And I suppose that's intentional. So even if they're not wearing turbans, they have a kufi type of a hat that they wear. But I was bareheaded, so I walked through the markets and discovered, all of a sudden I didn't feel so hot. And I think I got heat stroke because there was the sun beating down on my head, coupled with the intense heat and the close quarters. So there's not a lot of, there's no wind blowing through it. The air is kind of still in the market. So yeah, I didn't enjoy that. And the other thing I really didn't enjoy was when I was insistent upon seeing the tanning pits. I had seen tanning pits. Well, needless to say, I have an affinity for Nigeria, or for Kano, Nigeria in particular. And I should note that, as I understand, going to North Nigeria and Southern Nigeria, two different worlds. It's kind of like almost visiting two different countries. So I have an affinity for Kano, obviously. I wrote the book about it. But I do love Morocco. I was fascinated by the places I saw in Morocco. Again, the antiquity in Morocco, throughout Morocco, northern Nigeria. A lot of Morocco is Islamic, as is Kano. Kano is about 95% Muslim. But yeah, I really enjoyed visiting Morocco as well. I think what surprised me the most about going to Kano was the history that we don't know anything about. The current Emir, the 16th Emir of Kano, is part of a dynasty. And we don't hear those types of things. When I hear dynasty, I usually think of ancient Egypt. And somehow that's kind of been halfway Europeanized. They've made that something different than what I think it is. However, but in Kano, I think I was fascinated by the history and the traditions and the legacies, and it's absolutely fascinating country, or part of the country. And it's part of this trans-Saharan trade route, I mean, which goes back centuries. And so those types of things I was unfamiliar with. I always, when I travel, I try to go in with an open mind, certain innocence, certain ignorance, understanding you don't know what you don't know. And I knew going there, I didn't know anything. So I didn't go in with preconceived notions too much. I went to see the Durbar Festival, which is the as they say there, the festival of, whether, depending on who you ask, the festival of 5,000 horses, the festival of 10,000 horses, but it's a horse parade. I think I was fascinated to discover that they were an equestrian culture, that there are a lot of horses in Kano, and you know that horses are not indigenous to Nigeria. So to discover that you had these people, and it wasn't uncommon to see horses and people riding horses through the community on horseback. The Emir himself, when one of the events I went to, he comes out on horseback, surrounded by his people, and then there are the camels that are following him, playing the drums and all of that. But I think the history, the legacy, the tradition that goes back hundreds of years. Kano is older than America by many times. And so I didn't really know that so much. It was also fascinating to me to discover that, when you visit a lot of other countries, in Morocco not so much, but there's a strong understanding about where the North Atlantic slave trade impacted that community. Not so much in Kano. In fact, that conversation never came up at all. We never had those discussions. Oh, the pageantry, the things that I got the opportunity to participate in and see, the richness. I mean, to go to the palace and on the day, and I don't want to get the terms confused, but during the Salah celebrations and their different events. United States, talking about presidents and leadership and all of that. And there's been a great deal of turmoil. So imagine that going back 1,000 years, and actually perhaps even beyond that. But documentation goes back 1,000 years. Yeah, I mean, when I was in Morocco, Morocco is a monarchy, and so Morocco has a king. when I was in Ghana, Ghana has systems of royalty as well, and I can't pronounce the name of the king of the Andinkra or the Ashanti, and he's in Kumasi. So I saw the king's palace in Ghana. So I mean, everybody has their own traditions, and there there are a lot of chieftaincies throughout Africa, depending on where you are. So chieftaincy, but again, it breaks down. It's basically the same thing.